Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic. Module 2 in week 2 of our cybersecurity principles, CSC 4004 for term 2. Hope you had a very good week, the first week on the introduction of cybersecurity concepts, including the CIA triad, AAA, and generally the understanding of what the principles look like, okay, how the protections look like, and so forth. Now, this week, we're going to look at a number of things. So what we're going to learn about is having a second look at vulnerabilities and threats and categories of attackers and attacks, just to give you the bit of a background to what we have seen in the last part of the last module of the first module, talking about vulnerabilities, threats, and attacks, and to contextualize it. And then we'll be looking at a framework for securing our corporate networks and organizations by looking at the NIST cybersecurity framework. While there are other frameworks as well, for example, the Essential 8 in Australia, we also have an information security manual. If you look closely, most of these were directly derived from the NIST cybersecurity framework or its predecessor, the NIST Special Publication 800-53. So as usual in cybersecurity and in many other technological things, the United States is at the forefront of standardization and innovation. And while these get adopted primarily in the United States, but they also get either used as is or standardized in some context of the particular organization or jurisdiction. But there is very little difference. If your organization is deemed to be at some level of NIST CSF, then it's just a matter of showing the equivalence in terms of the Essential 8, or the US Department of Defense has a slightly more rigorous take on CSF, but CSF is probably thought of as the most neutral and something that you'd learn in other certifications as well. For example, the Cyb certification and so on, they will also cover this kind of frameworks. But we'll talk about those frameworks in a bit. We'll look into the processes, the categories, functions, and then, of course, after this, we'll also look into CIS control. So that comes after we finish the first part. So any questions so far? Nothing as such, so we'll continue. Feel free to, if you have anything, just raise your hand and we'll chat about it. Okay, so first having a look at vulnerabilities. And as vulnerabilities are weaknesses, right? Weaknesses in software, weaknesses in hardware, weaknesses in communications, and anything that we do in IT may have some weaknesses, and vulnerability represents those weaknesses. And they provide sort of an opportunity for an attacker to cause harm to the CIA by exploiting the vulnerability. So what are some of the examples? Poorly chosen passwords. If passwords are not adequately strong, then that affects what kind of, which one of those CIA triad. for example, the confidentiality, right? So when you're going to, and also the authentication. So if you're using username and password to enter into a website that allows you to view things, then it affects the confidentiality. If it also allows you further access through the access control mechanism to change things, then also affects the integrity. And for example, if it has controls that allows you to start and stop a service, it may also affect availability. So always think in those three terms whenever you're looking at vulnerabilities and attacks. Next is software. Yes, Ahmed?
Yeah, if I may share like one example, I'm not sure like this one could be like, vulnerability. Previously, like, there is some, let's say, brochure or whatever, like document. I'll link it to FTP, like, link. So if you remove like, just the brochure, you can like, what's called navigate through like, the FTP directory. So this is it like, this one part of the vulnerability, like,
Yes, it is. It is called a path traversal vulnerability. And one of these, in early days, the websites were not hardened well enough. And out of the box, if you had a web server, that web server would perhaps sometimes allow a visitor to change the URLs. For example, you mentioned take the brochure off, and it will let you see what are the other documents present in that directory. That thing is now long gone because now it's become a standard. But there was a long period of time, long time ago, when this kind of vulnerability existed. Not just that, there was one more, which is called the /bug, which is basically it would, if you put in, let's say home/user /something, right? You have a name of a file in your home directory. In that case, instead of putting the name of the file, if you put /, which in Unix implies the upper level directory, then / and then the name of that subdirectory that you want to go to, and mention the whole path along with the name of the file, then the web server would interpret it as the correct, fully interpreted, reference to that file, and it will retrieve it and show it to you. So does it make sense? So there's a lot of different ways attackers find ways of exploiting a system, and the system can be naive, not checking the input and so on. So we have another raise hand. Shemix, yeah, go ahead.
The others are requesting to record the class.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. How
No
come
worries.
Okay. So let's record the class. Thankfully, we haven't done a lot. Oops, something is coming the way.
Recording in progress.
Okay.
Yeah, it started now.
Yeah, thank you very much for raising that. So we were discussing about vulnerabilities. That's the first part of the talk. In the remaining talks, we're also going to touch on cybersecurity framework as well as CIS controls, top 20 or top 80 controls. So when we were discussing about the vulnerabilities, we talked about poorly chosen passwords. We know the meaning of what can go wrong when passwords are poorly chosen. Software bugs, essentially, these are vulnerabilities hidden inside a software that was developed by a software developer. And there are many, many different bugs and possible attack vectors by using a software. Here, one of the examples is given is buffer overflow vulnerability. So this is a particular type of vulnerability when a user input is saved in sort of like a memory, an array or any type of memory, and the size is not fixed, meaning they don't look at the length of the input and put in as much input the user provides. What that means is eventually it's going to write over this data that the user provides, is going to write over into the overflowing part of that software and corrupt the memory of that software. Basically, a clever attacker can modify the program as it is running if they know what to look for. And the way they do it is they download the source code, they run the source code, and they can actually debug the source code in real time to see how much of an offset is required to be input in the whatever variable is collecting this data and storing in the memory to overflow what instruction that's already available and loaded in the memory. If you can manipulate that, then you can change the behavior of the software. Now, there are some crude examples where the only thing it manages to do is to have the software code dump, and it drops you in the privileges of the software. If the software that was running with higher privileges, like super user privileges, then the shell that it's dropped to also contains that super user privilege. Therefore, the attacker can get control of the whole system. So it's a very, very critical, highly effective and dangerous kind of attack, buffer overflow attacks. And it can be minimized by analyzing the source code during static analysis as well as dynamic analysis. And probably we'll be talking about a little bit more when we discuss about intrusion detection systems and so on. Automatically running active content macro scripts, Java programs. These are also another class of vulnerabilities where your computer allows external scripts or programs to be run, right? So if you remember in the early days, one of the appeal of Microsoft Word, documents, Excel, spreadsheets, and so on was that it allowed the use of scripts that used to be called macros. So once you double click on a file, maybe it's a Word file or an Excel file, it warns you that it has a macro inside. You intend to run it. In the early days, by default, the macros would run. And the macros would run, it was capable of doing something. It's like a code running on your system, okay? And that's why Microsoft later on turned off macros by default. You have to manually enable the macros on a file-by-file basis. Same goes for scripts. So what are the common examples of scripts? So if you have a browser that you're going to a website, to visit a website, in that case, there are two types of websites, okay? One website is an example of the early days of HTTP protocol, early days of websites, and those are basically static web pages. So nothing moves, nothing changes. It's just a bunch of text and links. And there's not much interactivity. So you can't move your cursor on a button and the button, pops up or something like that. These kind of effects are only brought in by the use of scripts. Okay. Now, JavaScripts to be more specific. And these are very useful. In fact, if you turn off all JavaScripts, then you wouldn't be able to do most of the things that you do on the web. You wouldn't be able to see ads, you wouldn't be able to play games. Nothing would appear the way the internet looks like without the use of HTML5 and JavaScripts. So, of course, it is doing a lot of good things. However, one of the issues with running programs, arbitrary code on your browser is that that piece of code is running in your system. If it can escape the securities of your browser, then it can go into your operating system and cause problems. Thankfully, our browsers, especially the Chromium-based browsers, are very robust in terms of managing executions of scripts. So it's very, very robust. However, for the duration of the time that you are actually looking into the web page and using or visiting the web page, the code will still run. Okay, there are some obvious things that Chromium is able to block, but not everything. So, did I mention to you in the last lecture that there was an advice from the Prime Minister of Australia, Albanese, to turn off your mobiles for 5 minutes every day. Did I mention that to you? Okay. So if not, it was televised. So okay. So if it's all right, so if I haven't mentioned, it's very interesting. I was watching the news one day and I saw that Albanese was saying in the first term as prime minister, he was saying that look, we can all keep safe in terms of cybersecurity, and what you can do is when you're going to brush your teeth every night, please turn off your mobile phones for 5 minutes and then turn it back on. It doesn't harm you a lot, but it will save you from a lot of problems. And that kept me thinking, hey, what he's saying is absolutely correct. It's probably some advice. Yeah, that's the one given to him by his security advisors. But essentially, these are the kind of malwares that you have managed to download by going to different websites on your mobile phone, and that probably has the ability to listen to what you're saying, to read what you're typing, to make sense of what you're doing, and getting other telemetries from your usage. But it only lasts as long as it's in memory, as long as you're visiting that website and it's already, or the app is running, right? So the best thing to do is to reboot. And once you reboot, it has a nice booting sequence that it always reads, in a tested like TPM, trusted protected modules. It reads from its own BIOS, and then it reads from the RAM, the part of that memory where it stores its own operating system, and then it starts loading the apps one by one. Which means if the malwares that where you are seeing as scripts got downloaded, but it had no way of writing itself somewhere, then you're still safe because that malware is now gone. You still have to visit those places to get those malwares again. That's your daily dosage of malware and the daily dosage of sort of action of turning it off and then keeping safe. So thanks for that link. Whoever sent it, I can't see your name, but thank you very much. I had that open in the last class, but I forgot to show it to you, I guess. Okay, so essentially that. What are the other vulnerabilities? Open ports. There are two examples given. Telnet and Mail. These are applications of internet where you can log in from one machine to another machine. It's called Telnet, or Telnet is now long gone because Telnet itself was completely unencrypted. It was in plain text. So whatever you typed in, including your username and password, could be seen by anyone who is sitting between yourself and the remote machine. So Telnet's are long gone. It's replaced by Secure Shell, meaning now people use Secure Shell rather than Telnet. Secure Shell uses encryptions and private key, public key encryptions. So these are very, very useful. So open ports, by open ports, what they mean is your computer has an IP address, right? So it's similar to the number of your house, the road number, right, of your residence or wherever you live. Now, if someone is going to send you a mail, they're going to put in the number of the house and then the postcode and so on. So the postman is going to put that one in your mailbox. But then when you take the mailbox, that post out, that envelope out, who do you give it to? Who in your house is going to receive it, right? There needs to be a name. And there are multiple names in a household. So that name is the basically equivalent form. The equivalent form of those names in the internet world is known as the ports. So in your computer, there resides many applications. Your browser is an application. Any server that you have is an application. So let's talk about a server. In a server, there could be many applications. One of the application in the server could be a web server. Another one could be an FTP server. Another one could be a file server. So there are many network services that can run at the same time on a server. However, there are also dedicated machines that run nothing else except one service. Okay? In that case, there are only few ports open. We do need few more ports, but you need as many ports as there are applications. Does it make sense? Okay. So if you don't know what's running on your computer, one way to look at it is opening the task manager and going through Windows system, or on Unix, you can type in PS. PS stands for processes. You can see more by typing in PS minus UX, giving the users all the programs and processes that are running under the user's account. They will all show up. Now, these processes, some of the processes could be malicious, and you don't know. Okay, and when these processes basically want to receive information or send information, they need to open a port. When they open a port, it shows up on the scans, external scans to your machine. So that's why attackers often start by scanning a remote machine using, there are many different tools, but one of the most common tools that you have probably used or will use is known as Nmap. It's a Unix tool that comes standard with in many distros, including Kali Linux. So you use Nmap, and then you can actually use scan a remote computer or even a local computer for all open ports. As I said, most of the ports will be legitimate ports used by your system, your operating system, or your applications, and so on. Like something could be a database, something could be, an SSH server, something could be a domain name server, because something could be a mail server, and so on. But there could be few that are open that may or may not have similar or familiar names, but that could be basically malwares opening the ports to listen to the creators or the command and controls. They will be connecting to your machine, and when they connect to that port, they can authenticate or they can have access to some part of your machine. Okay, that's why we need to regularly go through all open ports and try to close them. The next one is incorrect configurations. Very easy to understand. Incorrect configurations will allow someone to have read access or write access or execute access to files that you didn't want to share with them, or you didn't want them to be made available. Untrained user system administrators, again, these are people that need to learn a little bit of cybersecurity or how to take care of their own systems. Untrained users, therefore, we need to raise awareness and education. Trapdoors or intentional security holes. So these are basically you let someone in and then you get a notification that they have come. So there are many different types: honey pots, honey nets. There are many kinds of honey pots, honey nets. There are some that are known as stepping stones. So it will only raise an alarm if the attacker does this and this and this, and only then we know they're an attacker, not a normal user. Unencrypted communication, as I mentioned last week, that anything unencrypted is susceptible to plain text attack. So anyone can read what you're doing. They can reconstruct your activities online. And limited resources like TCP connections, limited resources of your internet bandwidth or storage system makes your system unavailable, right? You can quickly go into a state where the user cannot do everything that they wanted to do. Okay. So we looked at the vulnerabilities. Now we look at the attacks. So what are the attacks? Attacks are the means of exploiting the system, right? So we have discussed some of the attacks already. So password crackers exploits the vulnerability of weak passwords, right? Viruses, worms, viruses, come and infect other files. Worms not only can infect files, but they can infect other systems. Trojan horses are applications that work or behave like a benign or a regular application, but they can be triggered into doing something malicious, or under certain under certain conditions, it can behave differently. Social engineering, we already talked about these things. Packet sniffers is a kind of packet sniffers are not really attacks. Packet sniffers are programs that can, or applications that can collect network traffic and then can analyze the network traffic to figure out what the different fields in the network traffic contains. But they can be used for attack. Yes.
I was expecting to see key logging on there.
Sorry?
I was expecting to see key logging.
Key logging. Yes, key logging could be another example. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just an example of some of the attacks. Yeah. Ahmed?
Yes, all generation, who experienced the window messenger before, WhatsApp and this technology, there was application called MSN Sniper, at that time. So if you are connected to the same network, you'll be able to read every message coming through this network.
Yes, you're right. So basically, that's another thing. On a local network, most of us are in a trusted environment. We trust each other. So, however, having said that, there are certain tools that can allow you to choose an IP address belonging to the same network that you have, and then it can start collecting, because many of these local area networks were on the same broadcast domain, meaning whatever you're passing, everyone else is receiving. If that is the case, it's even worse. Then you can collect everything and can reconstruct if it's plain text. So that's the key. Encrypt everything, or rely on applications that encrypt everything. Okay? Do not think that you are safe anywhere. Even with encrypted things, just imagine, and we'll be discussing this more during the classes on cryptography, but imagine that you're feeling safe and that you have done a lot of, you've communicated to someone on internet very, very confidential things that you do not expect at all to be revealed. Okay. However, at certain point of time, people are able to break encryption if they try long enough. That's what cryptography will tell you. But that long enough is long enough. However, there are techniques, tools like quantum machines are coming up, which can reduce the exponential nature of that computation to polynomial. In other words, it can be done in a quicker time than before. And also advances in the machines themselves, right? So, and algorithms. So anyway, the last one is an example of availability attack, denial of service, TCP seen packet flood. So TCP, whenever you come across this kind of acronyms, if you do have an IT background, it's probably very easy for you to understand. But if you don't, I strongly encourage you to go online, type it in, and just have a brief look at what that really means. I think some of you who have done in the last lecture at the end of the module, if you have clicked on a link to test yourself on Macumber Cube, some of you wouldn't get many of the answers correct if you didn't know what those terms meant. For example, one of the terms in one of the questions I checked after I saw that few people had difficulties in understanding why they got this wrong, because there's no explanation there. And it's a third-party website. It's a good website, but you don't have to feel bad if you don't get that correct, because the demographic is different. They're looking at people with different backgrounds understanding this. However, if you just looked up the words TKIP and also CCMP and other kind of things that were mentioned there, you'd know these are protocols used to ensure integrity of wireless messages. These were part of wireless equivalent protocol, or WEP, which is now deprecated. Nobody uses it because it's useless. it has been broken already. So so that part of the question relates to integrity. Now you understand, because these protocols relate to integrity. This one here, TCP SYN. TCP is the TCP/IP protocol. You must have heard TCP/IP protocol, which is known as the Internet Protocol. So TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol, and one of the kind of packets that TCP uses to establish a connection between two computers is known as a SYN packet. How it works? This is known as a TCP three-way handshake. This is something that happens for any or most internet communication. Even if you are typing in google.com, your browser is actually initiating a TCP handshake with the Google remote server, or any other servers in between. So what it does, the sender sends a TCP SYN packet. Just the packet has a SYN flag in it. And then if it's received by the recipient, the server, it acknowledges that it's ready to talk to the client by sending a SYN plus an ACK packet. And then once this packet is received, the client or the sender now sends so then it starts sending the packet. So it's a three-way handshake, right? And then once it's finished, it will send a FIN packet. Then the conversation is now finished. So all the TCP communication starts with the three-way handshake. The attackers found that if the sender, let's say an attacker is a sender, it sends a SYN packet to, let's say, Google web server. What the Google web server does is it creates a space, amount of memory, allocates an amount of memory to keep track of the TCP SYN packet coming from the origin, which is a client. And until it completes the handshake, this memory is not deleted because it's still waiting for that communication to happen. So what the attacker did or used to do is to send hundreds and thousands of SYN packets and never follow up with the request of SYN ACK with an ACK. So TCP sends a SYN, and then SYN ACK comes, and the last packet to complete the three handshake is an ACK plus the data packet. But it never sends the ACK. So this missing ACK was going to, what it meant is that all the available memory slots to keep this communication information was occupied. Now, if a table is occupied with stale communication records, what really means? The new legitimate people who want to send, the clients who want to send the request cannot send it because it's full. So server would respond with, sorry, I'm busy, or server too busy, something like that. So this is an example of availability attack or denial of service attack. Does it make sense to everyone? The next slide talks about who are behind these attacks and what is their motivation. So a hacker is someone who seeks and exploits weaknesses, plain and simple as that. There are two main classes of hackers, right? Because hacker is an overused term. In the initial stages of internet, hacker used to be someone benevolent, does digging, hacking to understand things and fix things, right? But later on, the bad guys got into it, and then they started breaking things, but not to make it better, but to exploit for their own purposes. And they are mostly known as crackers and hackers. Now they mean the same thing. But there are two main classes. One is the white hat hacker, who are basically professionals, ethical ethical hackers, and so on, pen testers and so on. But the other group is black hat hacker, meaning they're basically the crackers. Gray hat hacker is somewhere in the middle. So this is curious. Yes, they basically can switch sides. So let's say on a good day, they think that, hey, let me get that $10,000 bounty that Microsoft has offered us to find bugs in their software. They'll participate in it, and this is white hat hacking. So you're hacking Microsoft thing and then getting the reward for it, right? But the gray hat hacker would do the same thing, but would not reveal the issues. They would rather exploit it in real time. Okay, does it make sense? What's the difference? Now, again, like I said, there are different types of attackers. It makes sense to have brief understanding. There's another full, complete subject. If you're doing Master of Cybersecurity, I think that subject is also compulsory for you, mandatory, Inside the Mind of Hackers. And they will also discuss all of this in detail. But for the rest of you who just want to know who are attacking us, right? So there are many different types of reasons why, there are hackers who attack us. Hackers could be, they're very intellectual person. I mean, they're very skilled computers and IT professionals, and they want to do something. Obviously, they can't do much good. Maybe they can do much harm. Insiders would be someone, trying to get for disgruntled employees. I mentioned before, could be an insider attack. Criminals seeking financial gain. The most number of attacks happening nowadays are financially related. It doesn't necessarily mean they attack the big corporations for financial gain. Maybe they'll attack individuals, steal their identity credentials, and make use of them. Then you've got terrorists and so on who have their own agenda. But interesting is the tactical countermeasures intended to disrupt military capability. Military comes in number of times. So there's a term called cyber warfare. And cyber warfare mostly precedes the actual physical warfare because they want to find targets, they want to find weaknesses in critical infrastructure of the systems, maybe shut it down electronically even before a single bomb is dropped. They have an advantage. And there are many examples of recent physical warfare that accompanied with cyber warfare. So just have a look on Google and you'll find. There are two types of attacks, passive attacks. Ahmed said, do we need to study all these terminologies for the exam? Obviously, these are just very simple. These are the kind of things that you have already looked into the glossary of terms in module 1. Some of them were discussed, some of them are not. Yeah.
Yeah, but for the type, for example, for the attackers, for example, this one insider between a criminal or cyber attacker, do we need like to distinguish to be able to distinguish between different type of attackers?
Which one? Sandwiched?
Distinguish between, for example, hackers and cybersecurity attackers of whatever.
I don't think there will be a direct question like that, but obviously anything related to cybersecurity, which is mentioned in the course, will be subject to your understanding and quizzes or things like that. But I don't see a big deal of things coming. I can't create a very complex question out of this, basically. Can focus of generic type of attacks. There are two types, right? One of them is called passive attack. The other one is active. There's a very simple example here. Passive attacks are basically listening, gathering intel. Okay. One class of intelligence is known as OSINT, or open source intelligence. So basically, every time someone types in your name or something you do along, or any kind of information related to you, they can find out from open sources, including Google, is known as open source intelligence. They can find out your phone number, they can find your email address. At the very least, they can send you a very directed and compelling email posing as someone you may trust by looking up your company information and so on, finding your boss and pretending to be them. And previously, we have received such kind of targeted emails. These are the most difficult type of emails to detect automatically because they don't sound different. They don't sound like spam. Right. Nazir was asking, how can you listen to encrypted data? The same way you can listen to unencrypted data. Essentially, in layer 2 of the OSI layer of the stack, is just data that's you're receiving. You're receiving zeros and ones, right? Because computers can only read zeros and ones. Once you receive zeros and ones, how you interpret it is up to you. If you convert it to text and if it makes meaning to you, then it's plain text and you've got it. But if you convert it to text and it doesn't make sense, then maybe it's a meaningless thing, or it could have a meaning if it could be decrypted. So the way you listen to encrypted data is the same as plain text data, except that you do not know that if you don't know the key, you cannot retrieve the plain text equivalent of it for now. For now, okay? But you may not have the capability. Maybe the government has the capability, and the government will never release it. In the early days of Internet Explorer, I think Internet Explorer version 3 or version 5, the United States government did not allow the export of Internet Explorer 3 or 5 because it had 128 bits encryption. At that time, 128-bit encryption was thought to be uncrackable. Why would a government not allow the sales of a browser that is secure? Just look up on internet on this kind of restrictions. Even now, there are export restrictions of certain kind of encryption technologies and so on. The only reason I can think of is if the government wants to listen to what you're saying, and if they have the capability of decrypting whatever you're doing on internet. Does it make sense? Yes. So criminal organizations could be, but how many criminals exist in the world compared to normal people, Zaid? How many criminals exist in the world compared to normal users? And that was the reason why
It doesn't matter.
they had to ship Microsoft Windows, I think early versions of Microsoft Windows, with an older version of Internet Explorer rather than the Internet Explorer that was usable within United States. In US, they could use the higher encryption, but not overseas. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on. Active attacks is basically, as you know, masquerading attack, replay attack, modification of messages, and so on. These are active attacks. But the idea that I was giving to you, even encrypted messages are not safe, but you can only do so much. So that means always choose the highest level of encryption, whatever protocols you're using, use maybe rotary shifting, all of these things, and so on. Internal security threats, external security threats. And you can broadly classify the common attack types into network-based attacks, web-based attacks, which we'll discuss more of when we look into OWASP. In one of the modules will be just dedicated to web attacks. And there are certain attacks on the operating systems. And then finally, you've got the social engineering attack and so on. So this is an example of network attack. Wireshark is a tool that you're supposed to use in one of your labs that you can look into these packets. And if you click on one of the packets, if it's unencrypted, it will show you the content. You can see the content here. Now, this doesn't make sense. Probably this packet contained binary, not text data. Okay, so network attacks also include man-in-the-middle attack. By the way, I just want to remind you, nowadays, the names have changed a little bit. Now they don't want to call it man-in-the-middle attack. They want to call it person-in-the-middle attack or on-path attack. Recently, I took a cybersecurity, not recently, I think 1 year ago, I took cybersecurity, entry-level cybersecurity certification test. And to see how much of that is covered by my subject, right? And I passed very easily. Of course, they don't tell you a pass rate or success or anything. They just say pass or fail. But anyway, from the questions and answers, I realized that yes, if you are doing the subject, and if you wanted to start off with the certification, then you could take that one. It's called Certified in Cybersecurity from ISC Squared, the same organization or institution that gives CISP They also give this one. But this was free at that time. That's why I took it. You can have a look. I can type it in. Certified in cybersecurity. ISC squared. I'll probably, if you're interested, I can actually send you make an announcement and things like that.
Yes, please.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, in fact, one of the from few students who completed the subject and then took the test, letter thanked me and said that look, they passed it and so on. So it's a good opportunity. Yeah, and there's another attack called DNS hijacking. This is a point in time thing that I'm talking about. This used to be a big thing before. So DNS hijacking is still a thing, because if an attacker can get to respond to your DNS queries, so this is called DNS hijacking. So what are DNS servers? These are services that can respond to queries like www.google.com, right? So when we type in google.com, your computer needs an IP address to send it to, not the name. So IP address are 4 octets of numbers. Let's say 110.15.20.1, something like that, right? So this IP address is needed by your application to initiate that packet, right? So in the DNS server that you're sending, if that DNS server is hijacked by a criminal or a hacker, they can receive your query and then direct your query to a different machine than originally intended. So maybe they switch the IP address to the attacker's own Google clone website, and you wouldn't have a clue. You'd probably not realize that this is not Google. Okay. So DNS hijacking is really problematic, and that's why. But this actually happened because many DNS servers exist everywhere. You can even host your own DNS server. You can query it. You can let other people query it, and it's a hierarchical thing. So if they don't find something, they will go up, or they start up and then coming close to the information if they don't get it. Okay. All right. So next thing is web attacks. Examples include SQL attacks and cross-site scripting attack. We'll skip these things because we'll be looking at this in more detail okay, so maybe look at this slide. The kinds of social engineering attacks that can be phishing emails. So spear phishing is a targeted email. I mentioned about targeted email. On whaling is a targeted email or spear phishing attack on, big boss of a corporation. Phishing is voice phishing or phone calls. You'll hear lots of automated voice. You'll probably say hello, and they will keep on saying whatever they're recorded to say. So these are all automated voice-based phishing attack. Phishing is just SMS. Be very mindful whenever you receive an SMS. Mostly you'll probably receive it from linked. If you're in Victoria, other states could have other kinds of entities that collect tolls. So in Victoria, at least it's linked, and you'll receive a link from linked saying that, look, you haven't paid it, and you need to pay the toll, otherwise we'll send you a fine. And it's a shortened URL. It doesn't help that these companies also send shortened URLs as part of their regular legitimate messaging. So there is very little room for you to identify whether a particular received message is actually coming from the correct sender, right? In this case, legitimate sender. And if you click on it, you're obviously taken to a fake website, and you'll be asked to enter your username, password, or even pay. So these are the kind of things you can expect on SMS-based attacks. Spams, farming, I already talked about those things, really. Shoulder surfing, dumpster diving is basically in the old days when people used to work with papers. They used to do paper shredding or just dump the whole thing, and you can always collect from the recycles and you can see what's going on. There are even sophisticated AI algorithms that can be trained to align shredded pieces of papers. You need to do multiple passes and so on. It will take time, but you can reconstruct the original from the shredded individuals. Obviously, you need to scan them individually, and then all the pieces are over there in memory. It just does a lot of combinations and then figure it out. With the new kind of visual language models nowadays, maybe it's even more easier than before. Okay, so now we come to the main topic of.
Sorry, Doctor. I had
Yes.
a question on the previous slide.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, I think so. Related to module 1's activity, one of the activities to match, the events and the examples. And so one of the examples was documents left on printers.
Yep.
And the correct answer was social engineering. But I was I think I was a bit confused between social engineering and physical eavesdropping. And just wondering how does
No,
documents
we'll
left
call it.
on
Let's call everything social engineering, or in your particular case, it's probably a physical insecurity rather than anything else. It was a physical insecurity.
Okay, because the correct answer was social engineering to get sensitive.
Maybe there was no other option like physical insecurity. That's why social engineering would be the correct one.
So physical eavesdropping was there.
No, it's not physical eavesdropping. If it could be a physical insecurity, not eavesdropping.
Okay, I guess I was just confused
okay,
how is...
all right. So this is, or it's a bit nebulous, right? The thing is, in the old days, people used to say, "All right, can you, they actually triggered that sending of fax about someone to somewhere, and then they would go and pick it up." Does it make sense? So fax is a thing of the past. So I don't think it really makes much sense discussing about it now, because the equivalent form of thing is no longer there. So it's like sending an email to a common email box. And that common email box has many people's emails. But nobody would send it unless you request it. So maybe you're sending your medical report to the doctors. They have a fax machine, and all of them are having different patients. Now, you obviously trust the doctors there because they would only pick the ones that are related to them, right? And so basically, yeah. So basically, maybe the correct option would be physical insecurity. But if that's not present, I don't think why social engineering could not be chosen. Okay. Eavesdropping is more like the one like shoulder surfing, right? I'm trying to listen to what you're saying. That's actually the meaning of eavesdropping. I'm trying to overhear what you're saying. Okay. And the kind of thing that we look at the facts is basically a paper document. It's a physical insecurity. Yeah, so these are the kind of okay, there are two things here. One is, now that we have looked into the attackers, vulnerabilities, attackers, and why they do it, now the question naturally comes, how do we prevent it, right? How do we come up with a framework that will allow us to increase our security, or at least to measure our security posture? And such a security framework is the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? NIST cybersecurity framework. And if you compare with other kinds of frameworks also there that deals with cybersecurity, there is one called COVID 2019. It's a proprietary control from ISACA. We've got ISO 27001, which is a standard. And then US FIPS is also an older generation of control. There's also the NIST cybersecurity special publication 800-53. It's not mentioned here, but probably in some other slides. So these are also competing standards, but NIST is probably the most well-known standard. Okay, as I mentioned earlier on, there are many different standards you can look at.
Are these standards global?
Yes, it's a global standard.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. So if the question is, why don't you look at ISM? We can only look at some of them. If you're going to work with an organization that requires ISM, If you know what is NIST CSF, then a conversion from NIST CSF of your own company to an ISM equivalent standard is not difficult, but you need to understand at least one to be able to appreciate what the other one is. Then you've got the CIS controls, or Center for Information Security Controls. The version mentioned is a little bit old, but we'll be covering the old one and we'll be discussing what's new. So, and these are the number of controls over here. You can see NIST CSF. Let's see if there is a, okay, this is the latest version of this control that I talked about. So NIST CSF version 2 came into being after maybe, it came out in 2013, and it only got from version 1 to version 2 last year or the year before. So it has been there for a pretty long time, and nothing much has changed. They have actually added one more function to it, and we'll be discussing that soon. And the other one we'll be talking about is the sys controls. Now the current version is 8 or 8.1. And again, we'll be talking about sys controls very soon. The other ones we'll not be looking at, but in some cases, you may need to draw parallels. For example, how do you compare NIST CSF with CS controls? Or how do you compare NIST CSF with Essential 8? Or how do you compare NIST CSF with any other standards? So the way you do it is basically you map these functions with the high level function of the other type of standard, and that's how you trickle down. This is not something we'll be looking at in this subject. You can go on to do other GRC related subjects and get hands-on working experience on those. For this one, we'll be looking at the main concepts of the cybersecurity framework, why it's useful, what are the main functions, and also we'll be looking at few of the functions in controls of CIS control. Okay, so here you can see that the NIST cybersecurity framework, it has, there are a few advantages. Okay, number one, it's not, it's agnostic to vendors. It's not tied to any vendors that, okay, you do it Microsoft or you do it in Unix. It's sort of agnostic to the technology. It caters, it actually appeals to different organization sizes, small, medium enterprise to large organizations. And it also provides a continuous process of cybersecurity risk management. So I already told you about the benefits, right? One of the other benefits that I didn't mention is that if you do it properly, then it allows you to capture your current cybersecurity posture. So that means, so let's say you want to communicate your cybersecurity posture to some other company you want to deal with. Maybe you're getting acquired, merged, or simply for the reason of your industry. For example, you need to report your cybersecurity posture. In that case, NIST CSF provides a way or profile for you to demonstrate where you are without giving any details. You don't have to give the details. You just need to say, I am at this level. And then later on, it can be audited. Also, it lets you choose a target state. So let's say your current state is very low, and then you want to go to the target state. You just need to find out what are the additional things you need to do to achieve the target state. And once you know that, you can then prioritize your opportunities, prioritize your budget, and so on, so that you have the resources to be able to do that. So this is basically, you have this same image on your LMS2, and it's a sliding one. It's a nice activity, sliding activity. You can click on one of them, it will show you what's happening. So basically what's happening here is, you've got at the top, you've got the senior executive level, right? if a question ever comes, for example, in CISP handbook, which is over 1,000 pages long, the CISP handbook, which prepares you for the CISP certification, they have a common question. Who is responsible for cybersecurity in an organization? And they'll give you some convincing alternatives. So basically, the right choice is the senior executive, maybe the CEO. The CEO will have the ultimate responsibility of cybersecurity for that organization. So it all starts at the top. And then they know about the business goals of the organization, right? What does the organization represent? What kind of cybersecurity appetite, risk appetite do they have? And then based on this, they look at the organizational risks, identify the mission priorities, document it, and the budget, and then passes it on the next level, which is the business at the business process level, where it's basically the mid-level managers. Now, the mid-level managers are basically the heads of departments and so on. Some could be with accounting, some could be in IT, some could be in HR, right? They don't know really about cybersecurity. So that's why they need to discuss the business risks, but they understand the business risks, right? They understand the operating procedures of the business, but they need to communicate it with the IT people or the risk assessment people, and then come to a kind of overall understanding of what the main cybersecurity risks are pertaining to their business. And then what they do is they now create sort of a risk profile of their own company, and then passes on to the senior executive level, and the senior executive level evaluates what still needs to be done, and then adjust the budget, and then finally the second tier passes on to implementation tier. So basically, it goes to sub implementers of the cybersecurity, whether they're implementing firewall, whether they're using a web application firewall, whether they're putting detective controls or protective controls. These are all getting done at the bottom level, and then the progress is fed up to the business level, and then so it's an iterative process. It's a continuous process. It never ends. Sunil, no, we'll not be studying Essential 8 or ISM in this subject. We'll be only looking at CSF and CIS controls, but please feel free to go ahead and compare them. For example, if you go to the CIS website, if you look into the links, resources links, there are already links that allow you to compare the CSF controls with other controls. For example, it could be maybe that Essential 8 is not there, but you can do it yourself with the New Zealand ISM. New Zealand also has an ISM, okay? And let me see if I can find it. Just 1 second. I don't see. Okay, I'll look at it later once I finish this. Okay, just give me 1 second. Oops, where did I go? Right. Okay. So there are 3 tiers in the CSF framework, the cybersecurity framework: the core, the tiers, and the profile. Okay. So the core is basically the activities and the informative resources that are organized around particular outcomes. And this enables easy communication with stakeholders. It consists of categories, subcategories, and informative resources. And then also it consists of the functions, and we'll talk about the functions soon. The implementation tiers, there are basically 3 tiers of implementation. And then there's a framework profile, which basically aligns with industry standards and best practices. Okay, so it's still a bit abstract. Let me just go to individual slides here. So this is an example of the tiers. So there are 4 tiers here, tier 1 to tier 4. Okay, so tier 1 is a very entry-level tier. So this is basically, it's a partial implementation of CSF. So it could be, you know, you're a small to medium enterprise, your mom and dad company, and so on, who doesn't have the resources or even the knowledge or know-how how to protect the system according to the full standard. But they know something. For example, antivirus softwares protect your systems, spam folders, you know, what are the usefulness of certain tools and techniques, strong passwords, you know, the basic things. So you're at the partial level, and the majority of organizations fall under this category. The next level up is the risk informed. In risk informed, you at least know all the issues or the main issues related to cybersecurity exposures. Okay, so for example, you know what's a DDoS attack and what kind of backup systems you need in order to avoid a DDoS attack to your organization. You know, probably know about authentication, right? And you know about access control, but you either don't have the mindset or you don't have the budget to implement all types of controls that you know of. Okay, so you're in tier 2. You know of some things, but you haven't implemented those things. Tier 3 is repeatable. So in this tier, basically, they know how to do things in a repeatable fashion. That means they document the controls that they're using. They're identifying the most of the vulnerabilities. They are patching those vulnerabilities. They have an established process of identifying threats and getting on top of the threats. However, it still lacks the kind of security posture that would harden the system for 99.9% of the attack. For example, even though many companies, for example, Medicare, right, Medisecure, Optus, they got hacked. So where do you think they lie in these tiers? Tier 1? No. Tier 2? No. They're in tier 3. But still, they make mistakes. They are not proactive in identifying possible vulnerabilities, loopholes, and so on. So the last tier is an adaptive tier. It basically says that don't be static in your understanding of the threat landscape. Go and find out what the threats are. It's called threat hunting. And also look for peers. For example, when the Optus event happened, I'm pretty sure there are sleepless nights in the Telstra camp as well, right? Or Vodafone or whoever, whichever other telecom companies were running, they also had the fear of, of getting attacked. Now, or, some cybersecurity event would happen. So what they would do is, first of all, find out what really happened and then make sure that it doesn't happen to them. And number 2, be proactive. So in some organizations, for example, defense or government, they're actually at the highest level of in the adaptive part, because they go and hunt the attackers. They're trying to find out where the attacks are coming from and then go and they neutralize the attacks. So it's called offensive defense. And I think Claire McNeil, when she was the internal minister or in charge of cybersecurity, she said that Australian cybersecurity is now at the offensive defense stage. In other words, adaptive stage. Okay. All right. So this slide is showing us the core. As I mentioned, the core is composed of 6 functions in NIST-CSF version 2 or 5 functions in NIST-CSF version 1.1. Previously, it used to be called IPDRR, Identify, Protect, Detect, Respond, and Recover. Now it's GIPDRR, Govern, Identify, Protect, Detect, Respond, Recover. So essentially what happened is they took all the government functions from each of these and then created a new function called govern. And for each function, so functions are basically verbs. right? Action words. So we govern, we identify, we protect, we detect, we respond, recover. It's very easy to understand and relate to. But how do we do that, right? These are actually explained in terms of categories. You can see in govern, there are certain categories like organizational context, risk management strategy, roles, responsibilities, and authorities, policy, oversight, cybersecurity, supply chain risk management. This is a very new addition. For example, it wasn't there before, but now it's part of the govern. And each of these will have some context to it and examples. So there is a document. Let me see, where is the document? Stop sharing. Where is the document? Yeah, found it. Okay, I'll copy this on the chat window. This has examples. So the URL I shared, basically, these are implementation examples of the NIST CSA version 2. Given a category and a subcategory, for example, the subcategory was the organizational mission is understood and informs cybersecurity risk management. One of the examples is share the organization mission. So that means through your vision and mission statement, you can actually articulate your risk appetite in relation to the sector risk that you have perceived. Okay, let's take another look. This is governance, so maybe look at identify. Let's look at identify. We're still in govern. Identify here. Identify is a function, and one of the subcategories of identify is identification of hardware managed by the organization. Okay, inventories of hardware, and examples like how do you achieve this? You maintain an inventory of all types of hardware, including IT, IoT, OT, and mobile device, and you constantly monitor networks to detect new hardware and automatically update inventories. So these are basically examples of how you can achieve this goal, right? And there are about more than 300 of these implementation examples out here. If you count these, there are more than 300 something. Maybe I can find it here. Implementation examples, how many of them are there? Anyway, there's a lot of implementation examples. Let me go back to what I was sharing before. Share my. I lost it. Are you okay? Now you can see my screen? Okay. All right. Now, for NIST CSF, each of these categories also has some subcategories, and that's what one of the things I was reading. So for the function govern and the category organizational context, one of the subcategories is the organizational mission is understood and informs cybersecurity risk management. Okay, and these are the informative references. So you can correlate that gv.oc-01 with COBIT, with ISO 27001, with NIST Special Publication 800-53 as well. Okay, so these are all already done, but there are also third-party resources that you can find. Probably there is a mapping of this type, which includes your ISM or I haven't particularly looked at that, but if you're interested, you can have a look for that one. And in the end, this is a straightforward exercise of going through the ISM categories and functions and then correlating with this. But that's not the goal of this subject. Okay, now we know about the functions, we know about the categories and subcategories, right? Along with the business requirements. You also need to have understanding of the risk tolerance or risk appetite. Different organizations will have differing levels of risk appetite. Governments, defense, intelligence, they'll probably have a very high level of risk appetite. Also financial institutions, right? But on the other hand, public organizations, Wikipedia, these kind of things will have okay, let me take it back. The government institutions and the security agencies and those have low risk appetite. They don't have much hunger for risk. But the other organizations may have very high appetite for risk. And we'll talk more about this risk appetite in risk management. However, you need this risk tolerance or risk appetite in order to understand your risk profile. Okay, that's how you bring this together in a single profile and then say that this is what we need to achieve. So what comes into the risk profile? You bring in your business objectives, the requirement, the threat environment. So you know what kind of threats are affecting your business, and then you know what the requirements and the controls are. When you put them together, the document you get is known as a cybersecurity profile. These on the website, they have certain examples of these profiles. Different organizations have made this available on their own. You can go to NIST CSF, and then probably I think I saw one from Intel some time ago. They have provided this kind of risk profile. In fact, you need to provide this risk profile for certain types of industry level. For example, if you are a publicly listed company in the stock exchange, they will also need to know your risk profile. Now, jumping into the functions, individual functions. So you can see 5 functions and the govern in the middle, because govern basically controls everything. So the first one is govern, which says that it establishes and monitors the organization's cybersecurity risk management strategy to align with the business and regulatory requirements. And the next one is identify. And identify, you develop organizational understanding to manage cybersecurity risk to systems, assets, data, and capabilities. Okay. The most important thing is you want to protect your system, right? What are you trying to protect? You need to identify what you're trying to protect. If you don't know what you're trying to protect, how are you going to protect them? So first thing is you need to know what you have that you want to protect, your assets. It could be your IT asset, it could be non-IT asset, it could be any kind of asset that you have. Identifying the asset is the first step, okay? It also, in risk management, we do the same thing. So remember this, identification of assets is the most important thing. In this case, not just the assets, the data is also part of your asset, your capabilities, and all this is also part of assets. These are some kind of activities, sample activities that are offered through NIST CSF. One of them is identifying your business environment, identifying the critical business process. Okay, now you may look into, for example, asset classes, right? Different types of asset classes. Not all the assets are equal. Some assets are more critical to your business. Some assets are more important for evaluating, for your business turnover. Some assets are very difficult to replace. For example, the Mona Lisa painting, right, in Louvre. It's one of its kind, so it's virtually irreplaceable. Asset can have different viewpoints. So, for example, Amazon, products that you buy from Amazon in a box, in boxes, right? And you open the box and you use your enjoy your item, and then you throw the box away, or the box is probably damaged on the way, but you don't care because your item is still intact. Therefore, what is the importance of the box, and is it the same importance that the manufacturer of the box assigns to the boxes? Does it make sense? Amazon uses the box. It's not very expensive to them. It's not very important to them in the whole scheme of things. But for the box manufacturers, the box companies, this is the primary asset, right? So are you able to see the slides now?
No, we're referring to the one on LMS. We didn't see these slides on LMS. They're usually
This hasn't been uploaded yet. So these slides are basically an easier way for me to go through the contents of the LMS. LMS actually describes all of these things in raw text, but I've created these slides from those. Basically, these are slides from NIST themselves.
All right. Thank you.
But I will make them available to you.
Thank you.
Right. Next function is protect. So we looked into govern, we looked into identify. Once we have identified the assets, next we need to find out what we can do to protect our systems. So develop and implement appropriate safeguards to ensure that your systems is safe. Now, some of the sample protect activities include this. Maintenance. If you don't regularly maintain your systems, then it will be outdated. You need to have patching and these kind of things to maintain your system. So what's patching? Does anyone know what's patching?
Patching the OS, like
updating
the operating system patches, security vulnerabilities.
Can't hear you, Gaurav. Maybe.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, the operating system patches, right? For the Linux, for example, like security vulnerabilities, they release from time to time, even for like Windows, the updates that we receive on the laptops.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, patches are just like what you'd understand on a patch of cloth, right? So you fix it so that the previous vulnerability is gone. Now, ideally speaking, what you're trying to do is you're trying to replace an older vulnerable software with a new hardened software, right? That's what you want to do. If you have a broken machine, you throw it out and get a new machine. That's how you fix things, right? But the thing is, it may be too expensive to throw all of it away. Maybe you just fix only that part that's broken. And this is called patching.
I think a good example would be the iPhone, right? We upgrade the iOS version on our phones.
No, that's different.
No?
Okay. I think that's upgrading is different from patching. Let me explain.
But that fixes some of the, like maybe the security,
Yes,
no?
Yes, sure, not a problem. But upgrading and patching is not the same thing.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, let's just explain that. So patching is only fixing the relevant part of a big software ecosystem that needs a fix to get it working. Okay. What's the advantage? You don't have to re-download a large software. You don't have to set up everything from new. You just need to fix that particular thing, and the rest of the thing still works. In case of upgrading, you're essentially throwing out your old things, probably only saving some of the configuration files as before, so that when you're downloading the entire operating system or entire software, softwares can also have patches and so on, then you're reinstalling it on top of your hardware or existing operating system. So that's a more massive undertaking than just applying the patches. Yeah. Yeah, Zed says sometimes patching may produce another. Absolutely. Patching is just fixing a small thing. And if it hasn't been done properly, if it hasn't been actually looked at from holistically, maybe it's introducing some more vulnerabilities. That's what happens. Therefore, patches, after patches comes new patches and so on. They never tell you exactly what went wrong before. They just tell you, we are securing your system and so on. So Microsoft Windows at some point, they used to deliver equivalent of an entirely new operating system under the hood in the name of patches. They used to collect all of them and then release in one go. But essentially, so much patches, it just shows you that how many holes there were in the beginning, right? Okay. There are other things. Conducting regular backups, it's important. Protecting your sensitive data. I talked about patching the operating system, creating response and recovery plans. These are all part of your protect activities. Protecting your network, training your employees. So you have to have an understanding of what protect really means. Go through the categories and examples to have a feeling of how protect is different from detect, right? How protect is different from respond. So there is sometimes there are some subtle differences between the activities in protect and the activities in respond, which we'll address next. So protect, detect, and then respond. So detect is basically straightforward. Detect is anything that you do to identify whether you are under attack or an attack has already happened. Okay, so this essential part, because if you can't detect, then you won't be able to respond or recover. So some of the activities of detect, and this, excuse me, this is something that we'll be looking at more closely in the last module under access control and intrusion detection. But very quickly, that we need to understand how we need to use softwares and tools like intrusion detection techniques that will allow us to identify issues, right? Identify anomalies in our system and then take steps accordingly. And that requires continuous monitoring. But this also requires you to understand how your normal business looks like. If you're looking at data, what kind of data do you normally expect? Do you regularly monitor logs? So this is an essential part. Monitoring logs is an essential part of the detect phase. Then comes respond. The part that I said, the function that I said could be a little bit confusing with protect, because protect is something that you do beforehand, right? It is not a continuous process. It is a continuous, some of them is continuous process. For example, patching is a continuous process. But respond can have some overlaps with protect. For example, if you're going to patch something in response to a threat that you've identified, then the action is respond, not protect. Does it make sense? If you're doing something proactively to protect your system, is protect. But if you're responding to an event that you have identified, this is called respond. So although they have similar end goals, the circumstances under which you're doing this is different. Therefore, they are treated separately. Okay. So you're doing the protect thing throughout the year, but when you have to respond, you may have only a small amount of time, very short duration of time within which you need to respond. Okay? In the respond phase, what you're doing is you're communicating with your stakeholders, you're identifying the actual breach that happened, actual problem that happened, whether it's a open port that is closed, or whether it's a database that got hacked into, and data stolen. What would be the next step for each of these to stop this attack from happening? So response is the immediate action that you need to do to stop any further attacks happening due to that incident. Okay, that's one. Number two, you need to remove those threats. Stop similar attacks and identify the locations of the attacks, the damages of the attacks, and so on, plus also remove those threats. These are all part of respond. Finally, when it goes to recovery, the final stage, we talked about GIP, DRR. The last R is recovery. In the recovery phase, you already stopped everything, but still business is not running okay. You're not back to your normal position because maybe the attack deleted some files or encrypted something that you cannot recover from. What do you do? In case of either one of these, or either one of these, you go to your backups and then retrieve the backup and replace the missing files, right? So that's what you do for recovery. But of course, recovery needs planning. You need to communicate with everyone who will be responsible for recovery once it happens, because you cannot scramble for things when things go wrong. So these plans needs to be in place and so on. Okay, so you can look at all of these things. The governs one are missing, just everything else is here. But you can get the whole picture by going and clicking on that PDF that's present on your LMS. There's also one, because of lack of time, I cannot go through this with you. Maybe you can do it by yourself. There is a training game scenarios. It's called Facility Cyber Lab Works. And if you click on it, it will open up a nice website where you can apply your understanding of CSF using a gamified environment. Okay, I hope you like it. I used to do it before. In fact, I do it in my what do you call it? The semesters, because
Spare time.
No. I do it during the semesters. In the semesters, not the term ones. Terms are 6 weeks. Semester is the same content over 12 weeks. So I've got more time. At that time, I can show all of these things. Unfortunately, you have to do it yourself. Okay, now we come to the next part, which is basically the CIS controls. Okay. So CSF is basically a framework, and we look into action items. So CIS has a different view of the world. They look at what are the most effective countermeasures that we can do in order to save us from the most trouble. Okay. So what are the controls in the first place? The controls are basically safeguards or countermeasures that help us to avoid, detect, counteract, or minimize security threats and risks to physical systems, information systems, and so on. Basically, the ultimate goal is to protect the CIA triad. There are, depending on your when a control is applied or the time of the control, you can classify it as preventive, detective, and corrective controls. So if a control is applied before an event, it's known as a preventive control. If a control is applied during an event is happening, an incident is happening, it's a detective control. And if you do something to correct it, it's called corrective control. Example of preventive control is a lock, right? Lock is a preventive control. A detective control could be a camera, right? Or motion sensors, and so on. A corrective control could be police, or it could be someone, who fixes things, right? For example, someone has broken the lock, someone needs to come and replace that broken lock. So these are all corrective controls. Based on the nature, you can also classify based on nature, and you can see it could be physical controls, controls that are applied in the physical world. It could be procedural or administrative controls. So, for example, you create user manual, rules, laws, enforceable things, and so on. Technical logical controls are the bulk of the controls. For example, intrusion detection systems, antivirus systems, firewalls. These are all logical or technical controls. And finally, what we haven't called is the administrative controls. The difference between administrative procedural controls and the legal control is this, that in the procedural administrative controls, you have got a process that you follow to counteract the incidents. In regulatory controls are basically already in place. So basically, there are some rules, regulations that if you violate, then you're in trouble. So there are two different things. Now, when you talk about CIS controls, what does CIS stand for? It's the Center for Internet Security. It was founded back in 2000. And basically, they realized, the 2000 dot-com boom, right? Everyone who was around that time know that the whole world was just like what the whole world is running behind AI. At that time, they were running behind .com. There was a .com boom, and there was a .com bust as well. Now, will there be an AI bust? We don't know yet, right? We're very nearing that, unless we get something like a super intelligence very soon. Anyway, so what we're saying is that in the CIS, at that time, the system administrators of these web servers and big corporations, they got together and said, hey, why don't we share our information of the vectors of attacks that we receive so that we can come up with some common guidelines of how to secure and harden our systems. That was their goal. So what they did is they passed on surveys to many different companies, hundreds and hundreds of different members of CI security. They joined and they got these surveys, and the surveys asked them, what kind of attacks do you receive? The severity of the attack, the impact of the attack, how frequently do you see them? With all this data they compiled, they sorted out the threats, the risks, okay? Let's say they have 100 risks in total from all of these places. And 100 sorted in terms of most important risks. They publish the top 20. So this is like a 80-20 ratio. You know what's the 80-20 ratio? There was a famous saying, I think it's IBM or Microsoft. Yes, the Pareto law, correct. So it's a heavy tail distribution. So one of the software engineers, I think IBM or Microsoft, they said that by fixing the top 20 software bugs, you can fix 80% of the issues. Okay, 20% of people have 80% of the wealth in the world. In fact, much less, maybe 5% or 10% of the people. Okay, so that was the goal. So that doesn't mean when they publish the top 20, that doesn't mean that no more risks. There are more risks, but these are the top ones that they have listed. Now, there used to be top 20 risks, and that's what these slides are going to talk about. This risks were based in version 7.1. Currently, it's version 8 or 8.1, the same thing. Now they have reduced the top 20 to 18. They've basically merged a few, and the order of these changed a little bit. It's not a big deal. Once you understand one, you can understand the other. So, so what are these things? So we'll just jump into this. This according to version 7.1, and they come up with a new version number every 3 to 4 years. So we maybe in this year or the next, they will come up with version 9 or something like that. They will keep on coming, and all of these things changes. But the first few always remains the same. For example, the control number 1, inventory of and control of hardware assets, is the same in version 7.1 and version 8. Number 2 is also the same, and so on. There probably is a change in continuous version management. It's now called data controls. Anyway, there is a figure which shows how these things differ, and you can find out the on our LMS as well. So what are the benefits? The first thing is that it offense informs defense. Okay, so when they are looking at how they're being attacked, these system administrators, the kind of information they provide the defense is invaluable, because now they can prioritize which actions you need to take in order to protect from the most of these attacks. And therefore it leads to prioritization. You can also measure how much you are able to defend. And also it can lead to automation. If you know exactly what you need to do, you can automate stuff. You don't have to rely on individuals to implement it. Now, this is the 7.1, and it's very easy to understand. That's why I'm going to show you this one. There are basically three categories. The first category of the top 6 controls talks about cyber hygiene, or the basic cybersecurity that everyone needs to have. In category 2 are the foundations, called the foundational security controls. And finally, category 3 is the organizational security controls. Okay. Now, in category 1, this basic cybersecurity control is known as cyber hygiene. Why is this cyber hygiene important? Cyber hygiene is not only important for you because maybe you don't care about your own cybersecurity. Yes, it's the bare minimum, but I'm just trying to figure out, why is it as hygiene? Why is it a hygiene? Hygiene not only affects you, but anyone near you, right? In COVID-19, what did we experience? We experienced that personal hygiene is very, very important, because you could be the one spreading the disease. In case of cybersecurity, you could be the one spreading the malware through lateral movement. If someone trusts you and you are not really having the basic hygiene, then they are susceptible to attack from you. Okay, and had happened. Some nation state, I'm not going to name the country, they actually attacked some soft targets related to some critical infrastructure, and then those soft targets didn't have any cybersecurity, but they were directly connected to this secure system what they wanted to attack, and then that's how they got access to that. Okay, so anyway, not too much of information, but that's how you can get into trouble. So in the first control, I don't think we'll be able to manage going through all of them. Even on your website, which talks about version 8, the links are given. And if you click and you'll go to that version 8.1 cybersecurity control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's only 5 given. So if you just look at the first 5 or 6 of either this syscontrol version 7.1 or 8, that should be enough for you. That should be sufficient for you to understand. Yeah. So here in control 1, it's very similar to CSF. Remember in CSF, what was the thing we looked into in this CSF? The first was govern, of course, but just leave out govern. The first thing was identify. Identify your assets. Same thing here. The topmost thing in syscontrol is identify your hardware assets. And because there are many things. For example, there was one incident when a hospital in the US, in one of the states in US, in a hospital, they were doing a check in the server room to upgrade, and they found there was a wireless listening device attached to the server room that was connected for a very, very long time. So, and how did they figure out it was a long time? Because there were some manufacturing dates of equipments that were tied to and so on. So anyway, they figured out nobody had known the existence of this rogue device called rogue device for the last 15 years, 10 to 15 years, because it was that old. That technology that was sending the data exfiltrating outside was that old, 10 to 15 years old. And they haven't managed to detect this in a while. So if you do a regular inventory, this is a continuous process. Anytime you buy something new or procure something new or something new adds in, for example, you don't always have to buy. For example, you have a network, wireless network in your company, in your office, and then there's passwords, right? Or authentication process. Either way, a new device comes in and join. You can keep a track of which devices are joining your network. and then identify whether these are of any threat or not. In fact, you can create a whitelist created based on these. If you know that this device is owned by that person, then you create a whitelist. Some device can be owned by someone else and still can authenticate, right? And that's not what you want. Maybe that will be sitting in your server room, sending the data outside. So now also another aspect of cybersecurity is previously when there were less mobile devices, a system administrator or company would only have to manage the assets within their own perimeter. For example, you have a network and you've got these devices, you have a server, you have desktop machines everywhere, you have a printer, a scanner, and so on, all connected to the network. You know what to manage, right? But now there are different dimensions. Number one, they're bring your own devices. That means your employees are able to bring their own mobile phones, their own laptops into the office environment, thus adding an extra layer of insecurity. They're now part of your own network, on your own network. And if there is something going on in their system, that's bound to go into your other devices. So what do you do? What do you do then? You don't trust them, or what do you do?
Put additional security around it, like what they can access. You deploy some software on the devices so that they can't
There you go. Now you're
access.
talking about what is called as EDR, or endpoint detection systems. So in other words, you force them to use a hardened image. If they have a BYOD, maybe you can give them the laptops to take home, but say, okay, you're going to install my operating system, my image, and I have pre-installed some software that you'll not be able to remove. Simple as that. They will not be able to remove. If you use it, those software will work. And those includes antivirus software, other monitoring software that look at behavioral patterns and send telemetry to the office. That's how you know what's going on. Just like you would know from your own network, now you know from these EDRs that are based on your company's other machines that are elsewhere. That's one. Two is cloud. Many organizations, especially small and medium enterprises, don't invest the capex in building an infrastructure for their office hardwares. They rather rent cloud infrastructure. Of course, one good thing is cloud infrastructure is not touchable by others, so the physical security is all taken care of. Also, depending on your service level agreements, these cloud providers can also give you certain level of protections. Let's say network traffic protection, DDoS attacks. Cloudflare has DNS, protections and so on, web application firewalls. So some of those actually come built in with the service that you're getting. That's good, but there are certain services that will be add-on. They will charge you more. The more events that trigger, they will charge you based on events, and that's a problem. And this is sometimes known as the denial of wallet attack. Certain competitors can actually intentionally drive some kind of malware traffic to your cloud, therefore racking up your bills. Now, that might seem fantasy, but one of my PhD students is doing PhD right just on that. So it's not a fantasy. So he's getting survey data from companies and so on. By the way, if you have intels on these, or if you have got this kind of experience, let me know, and I will pass it on to him, because he's looking for more such examples if someone has experienced these things. Right. So what are the kind of devices we're talking about? Desktops, laptops, switches, routers, firewalls, printers, copiers, smartphones, and of course the servers, right? Virtual machines, and file servers and so on. How do you do hardware inventory? The best thing is to monitor with your own eyes, see it with your own eyes, write down the SKUs, the details and everything, and then maintain a log of when it was got in, who owns it, and so on. But there are also other software tools available like Spiceworks, Landsweeper, OpenAudit, Alienware. Some of them are proprietary, some of them are free, and they can run a sweep across your internet protocol and then find out what devices, by looking at the banners that the devices respond with, they can figure out some extent what kind of devices they are and nicely categorize it. You still need some hands-on massaging, but you can do it easily, right? And these are the kind of sub controls These are the methods of the controls: active discovery tool, passive discovery tool. Do you use DHCP logging? Do you maintain a detailed asset inventory? And all of these things are all the first also further classified according to the IDPRR. But the subcontrols have numbers 1.1 to 1.8. So if you follow 1.1 to 1.3, maybe you have the cyber hygiene. Okay. If you go beyond, then you go to the next category and so on. Control 2 is the same thing, so I'm not going to the detail. It's about inventory and control of software assets. Okay. What kind of software assets do you have? Including the operating system type, what version number, what application, and so on. You need to have a complete inventory of assets. And you see these examples of assets and how you do the inventory. Some of the same tools that you use that can inventory the hardware can also inventory the software. Okay, and these are the kind of activities. In version 7.1, the control 3 was continuous vulnerability management, which is very important. Like I said, continuously look into vulnerabilities that are exposed outside. For example, there are databases like CVE, CVE that actually shows you the vulnerabilities that are coming up, and CVD, NVD. These are all databases that contain vulnerabilities and notifications of risks and impact of these risks. So you can go through these things. There are certain tools that allow you to identify vulnerabilities. These are the kind of vulnerabilities we're looking at. Some of them come up all the time. Crack is a vulnerability that can attack the WAP2 standard. Now we put WAP3. Eternal Blue, Shell Shock, Heartbleed, Dirty Cow. These are all you can look up. But I think I missed a slide. So these are the tools that you can use to identify vulnerabilities. Nessus, Qualys, Alienvault, OpenVAS. OpenVAS I think is free, but the rest is probably now proprietary, especially Nessus. They started off free as well, but it's all license-based now. These are very powerful tools to identify majority of the vulnerabilities, and they regularly update the database of vulnerabilities with the published ones, so they can actually quickly identify these vulnerabilities. Okay, so I'll stop there, and we only have a few more minutes left. What I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this slide deck. There are numerous slides, but feel free to go through it. The main source of information will still be your LMS, but this is something you can use to if there's any additional thing you want to learn from it. By the way, some of the things that are on the slides you can also find out from the links, the equivalent forms of these other websites. So if any questions, anything you want to discuss? Where is the LMS? Just give me 1 second. I'm going to the LMS now. Yeah. Yeah, Shahram.
Hello. Just wondering if you have any discussion about assessment 2 as well, or
Assessment 2. Let me just very quickly go through assessment 2. Good. But I will be talking more about assessment 2 in the next one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Good question. Okay. So are you able to see my screen? We are on the LMS and we go to assessments. Let me have a look from your eyes, through your eyes. So student. Is the chat window gone? The chat window. Okay, here. So these are your assignment ones. You've already done quiz 1 and quiz 2 will be coming soon end of this week on Sunday. Now, when it comes to assignment 2, here are the details and instructions. Okay. do you see that yeah, there you go. So here's the case study. So you come to task details and you click on case study. Okay. So this is what you need to do. You need to do this. So the case study is the same as the instructions, but there's also a template. The template, if you follow the template and chapter 4 Whitman plus all the materials, it should be able to easily get it. But I'm just going to look into the case study. Okay.
So the modules 1, 2, 3 are good enough to
Yeah.
to use it as a knowledge to complete assessment 2.
Yeah, mainly module 3.
Just mainly module 3.
Yeah, but also all the threats that we talked about and attackers, threats, risks, and controls through module 1 and 2. This will also be important for you to understand. That's why we haven't discussed this until yet. But like in the next module, we'll go through risk assessment completely in detail, so you'll understand how to attack this problem.
So this is like a pretend to have a project and we then need to develop a risk assessment. Is that kind of?
Exactly. So you need to come up with so it's not like, so imagine you're an organization, right? And that organization installs this software, okay? Then based on the organizational, the risk posture, what kind of things, how do you assess the risk for that organization? That's what we're trying to say, okay?
Thank you.
So Sunil asked, do you need to do assessment 2 after module 3? I think it's best to wait until module 3 because you can start doing now. You can start reading module 3. What is risk? How do you calculate risk? Because everything is online. But if you want to wait till week 3, that's fine because you'll have 2 more weeks after that. I think the submission deadline is end of week 5. Next year we'll be definitely bringing it forward to end of week 4 because end of week 5 means that we may not be able to give everyone's results within 1 week if there's so many, but we'll try our best. Here. Yeah. So here is the thing. We've got a situation, an overview here. This is the brief of the scenario. Institution, for example, a university. This is an example. You don't have to use this example. You can use your own organization's information. You don't have to mention details of that organization or name it, but at least give a context that you are familiar with. And then, for whatever reason, you have to justify why they have used it. They have installed Claude Bot or OpenClaw, right? If you're in the AI, you know this thing that this was a crazy thing still going on. There are many security risks already identified. There are many that are sort of under the rugs. But we want to know from you, how do you evaluate it quantitatively and qualitatively based on a scenario?
Can we create a dummy organization?
Yes, of course. You can do that too. It doesn't need to be a real thing. It just needs to reflect on the practical aspects of that business. So they wanted to use a pilot. During the pilot, staff begin installing community skills, plugins to extend functionalities. And the recent security reporting indicates that malicious skills in the ecosystem can execute harmful code. Maybe OpenClaw itself has undisclosed vulnerabilities. We don't know, right? So all of these are on the table. The institution therefore needs a risk assessment before broader rollout and expanding integration access. So now, if we want to say, let's say the government has a policy, the government can say, do you remember that when the DeepSeek came up with this DeepSeek version, whichever version was stock market shattering at that time, the government said, mainly taking US lead, do not install it. Or sorry, don't install. I think the words were don't install it or don't use it. But because I was using locally, there is no point of, and I'm not connected, I'm air gapped, I'm not connected to anyone. So I didn't have to heed to that. But those who are using the API, obviously, I mean, that's up to them. But what I'm trying to say here is there are certain knee-jerk reactions. That's understandable because if this technology is new, you need to take some time and the heat off to realize and assess the risk. That's exactly what you're trying to do here. So the format would look like this. The cover page exists with summary, introduction, business viewpoint of the stakeholder context, and all of this will become, understand it clearly when I talk about risk in the next class. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so that's the thing. We'll talk about more about this. I think, unfortunately, we have come to the end of today's class, but feel free to